going to check on somebody, every time you administer medication, you aren't technically being watched. So it's very easy to do these things. And obviously, because we're seeing more and more of it, that's what's so shocking to me, really. Even though we've seen these signs, we have professionals who have identified specific things that we need to look for, it's still happening. Same way with serial killers. I will remind you, however, that the number of serial killers, and I'm not putting that in the same category as healthcare serial killers, that number is getting lower. I mean, we're seeing a decrease in the number of serial killers, mainly because of science and how easy it is now to be attached to or connected to a murder. So you see a lot more people not doing that. You're seeing a decrease. You know, the 70s was the high in the United States for serial killers. We had more serial killers at the time in the 70s during that span than any other time in our history. And then, of course, the 70s, that's when we got we had all of these special groups put together, and psychologists, and psychiatrists, and FBI agents, and they had the big summit, which really created this overarching rules and guidelines for serial killers, how to use information to determine if that person could be a serial killer, how to use science to connect them to a crime, all those things. And that has greatly reduced the number of serial killers that are active at any given time in the United States. Some really concerning facts that have come out about Lucy Letby. Letby, of course, is, I would say, 2023, the number one serial killer, international. I mean, it's just been a sensation because of the cruelty of her actions. But here, gosh, for me, this information is so disturbing on so many levels, and it really speaks to what I talked about earlier in this podcast about just needing a warm body to be there regardless, overlooking things that you normally wouldn't overlook, allowing people to get away with things that you would normally allow them to get away with because there's no one else to do the job. That is absolutely what has happened in the case of Lucy Letby. Consultants were told to apologize for raising concerns. Doctors at the hospital began to notice a steep rise in the number of babies who were dying or unexpectedly collapsing. This was in court. This was the testimony in court. But concerns raised by consultants over the increased mortality rate of patients under Letby's care were initially dismissed by the hospital's management. In September of 2016, Letby actually filed a grievance against her employers after she was relocated from the hospital's neonatal ward. She was put back on clerical duties after 2 male triplets died and a baby boy collapsed on 3 days in a row in June of 2016. Later that year, she was notified of the allegations against her by the Royal College of Nursing Union, but the complaint was later resolved in her favor. Doctors were asked to formally apologize to Letby in writing. She was scheduled to return to the neonatal department in March of 17, but her return did not take place. The hospital trust contacted the police, and that's when the investigation was opened. Gosh. You know, after the fact, when you're sitting back here and you're looking back on all of these things, that's when you can literally just say how horrible this was. Oh my goodness, we had all these things happen, and we didn't really see what was going on until, hindsight's 2020, that whole thing. But listen, there were so many red flags in this case, so many red flags. And hesitate to say it this way, but I really hope we've learned our lesson. I really feel like if you're a person who's being investigated for something like this and you're completely innocent, you should welcome someone wanting to either exonerate you or, well, I'm sure you wouldn't want somebody to purposefully try to get you in trouble for something you didn't do. But if I hadn't done anything wrong, I would say absolutely investigate all you want. I have nothing to hide. I have nothing to hide. I want you to get down to the bottom of this as well. I don't want our children being killed. So, for me to look back on this, for any of us to look back on this, and see all the different opportunities that people were given to stop this from happening, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. And it is a telltale sign of a breakdown in communication. Just like I say that there's a breakdown in the juvenile court system, in the regular normal prison system, in the mental health field. We're seeing all of that as well here in the nursing field in many of these cases, this one being the most recent, of course, but equally as bad as any of the others. Is heinous that she chose children who are completely innocent and unable to fight for themselves, to defend themselves. And certain people brought these issues up to light and then were told they were wrong. So I know that there's an ongoing investigation with this. There is an ongoing investigation. But I also think that there needs to be, I think some of these administrators need to be held accountable. And not only do they need to be held accountable, I think that needs to set a precedence so that in the future, if you have administration or consultants, these people who are trying to tell you these things are going wrong and no one's listening, that there's a price to pay for that. Now, do I think they need to go to jail for life? No, of course I don't. But I do think that there needs to be some punishment. Do they lose their job? Do they have to go through, a series of trainings? What do they need to do? There has to be some teeth into it so that people take these things seriously. One of the things that I've always said in education, it's mandatory for us to report. We're mandatory reporters, which means even if we suspect any of our children are being abused in any way, shape, or form, we are required by law to call and report it. We don't have to give our names if we don't want to. It can be completely anonymous. However, I always, in the past, I have always given my name and told them who I was calling about, what my concerns were, because I wanted them to know that as a professional in an administrative position, I was concerned about this and it should be taken seriously. And that's not to say that if you call and you report something anonymously, that it's not going to be taken seriously. It certainly is. But it holds more weight if you tell them who you are. I did not have a fear, really, of retaliation. Even though we had many people who would storm into our classrooms and demand to know why we called, Department of Children's Services on them. And they figure that out because the child's only been with you other than being at home. It could be anybody. It could be the neighbor who has watched the parent or guardian do all these different things and they've called in. But I've literally sat in my office and had parents or guardians speak horribly, threaten me, all kinds of horrible things for calling, for concerns. And really, all I can say is, I'm required by law to do that. It's not my job to investigate it. It's not my job to make sure you don't find out who told you. My 110% complete responsibility in this situation is I'm required by law to call and voice my concerns. And I will literally say, I'm not going to jail for you. I'm not going to jail to try to protect you. If you've not done anything wrong, then you have nothing to worry about. But, go through the process, and that's how I feel about it. I can lay my head down at night knowing that I've done everything that I'm supposed to do for a child, and with the knowledge that we are specifically told it is not your job to investigate. There are people that are trained to do that, and they should be the ones doing the investigating. But that's why as educators, we're considered mandatory reporters. We're with those children almost as much, sometimes more, than the parents or guardians are. So we know what's going on a lot of times. And that's how that works in the United States. I don't know how it works in the UK as far as education and reporting, that kind of thing. But I do know that in the United States, that, of course, is a law. It's difficult for my newer teachers. They're scared to report. They're scared to say anything. They're afraid of retaliation by the families. And I'm sure when I was younger, I recall having those hesitations because I didn't really want to get involved. But the reality of it is, if we don't step in, if we don't try to make a difference and save these children, who's going to do it? You're going to see more abuse. You're going to see more murders. You're going to see all these these circumstances that could have been avoided had we taken allegations seriously. And you're seeing this right here in the healthcare field, specifically in this case. It's mind-boggling, It's mind-boggling. But I think that we can learn from these things. Don't you think we can learn? We should learn from these experiences. What do we do in the future to ensure this does not happen? Are there certain things we need to do? Checkpoints we need to have? If someone reports that they suspect a nurse is causing harm to a patient, what immediately should kick in to help protect that patient, as well as protect that, medical professional if they're innocent, right? There has to be some things in place. And that's why we have to think about this. It's not pleasant. It's certainly not anything that anybody wants to have to deal with, but the fact is we have to deal with it. Penn State did a research project on statistics about female serial killers, and they determined that 39% of female serial killers were nurses or healthcare workers. 39% were in the healthcare field. Now that's just females, however. About 13%, are men. And according to another research project by Yorker, in the last 5 decades, 49% of healthcare serial killers are women. And in a sense, male nurses are overrepresented because even though they make up over half of nurse serial killers, they only make up about 13% of the nursing workforce. That's why those numbers are so confusing. in 50 years,